When the legal system falls short, some fathers take justice into their own hands. And today we dive into the gripping, real-life stories of men who stepped up to protect their children and confront their abusers directly. These are 10 dads who took revenge on child molesters. July 18, 2014, a distraught father in Daytona Beach, Florida, called 911 after he just caught a man molesting his son and had taken matters into his own hands. The actions he took left the assailant, Raymond Frolander, unconscious and badly beaten.
I just walked in and found a grown man, and I got him in a bloody puddle for you right now, officer.
When the dispatcher asked him how he'd knocked Frolander out, Browning simply replied,
"My fist and my foot."
It didn't take us long to see the shocking mugshot of the 18-year-old Frolander. It quickly went viral online, showing the brutal injuries he'd endured. It was a strong reminder of what a father can do when his child's in danger. And the question on everyone's mind was, what really happened? Well, according to Jason Browning, he sensed something was wrong as soon as he walked in the door. Frolander's expression gave him away. And when Frolander's pants fell to his ankles, there was no denying the horrific truth. Browning explained that Frolander, a family friend, had been watching his son while he was out. But when he got back home and discovered what had happened, he was so consumed by anger that he completely lost his temper. Browning even told the dispatcher,
"I loved him until 15 minutes ago."
Now it was clear that all Browning saw was red at that moment. So, what was it that stopped him from killing Frolander with his bare hands?
I attacked him viciously, and I didn't stop. The only time I paused was to go to the kitchen and retrieve the butcher knife because I was going to kill him.
Well, the father said that he wanted to kill him, but the son had intervened and actually saved his own attacker's life, reminding his father that, despite everything, he wasn't a killer.
He just looked at me and said, "Sir." And he shook his head and said, "No." And I just put the knife down. I just wouldn't traumatize him any more than he already was.
April 2nd, 2015, Frolander was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in prison for lewd and lascivious molestation of a minor. By accepting a plea deal, he avoided a mandatory life sentence. Yet, in addition to his prison term, Frolander was required to register as a offender for life, while wearing a GPS monitor for a while upon release. The father, meanwhile, faced no charges. When asked about Browning's actions, Daytona Beach Police Chief Michael Chitwood responded,
"The father acted as a father should act."
Now let me ask you, if someone targeted your daughters and received nothing more than probation for their crime, how would you react? Kenneth Faulkner, a 30-year-old from Columbia, Tennessee, found himself in that exact situation. Now his two daughters were solicited by 67-year-old Thomas Williams, who was related to the family by marriage. Faulkner had a hunch that something was up and reported it to the Columbia Police Department. When Williams' sentence was just 3 years of supervised probation, Faulkner got enraged. March 5th, 2015, after learning of the court's decision, Faulkner decided he couldn't let it go. He went to Williams' trailer home, confronted him, and asked,
"Why did you do it to my children?"
Williams' vague response of,
"I don't know,"
only fueled Faulkner's anger. According to the police report, Faulkner's confrontation turned violent quickly. He punched Williams in the face and threw him down the stairs. While Williams was on the ground, Faulkner continued to strike him, hitting him at least 10 times. Williams was then taken to the hospital, while Faulkner was arrested and charged with aggravated assault. Following the incident, Circuit Court Judge Robert Jones defended Williams' probation sentence, noting that Williams hadn't physically harmed the girls, and also that Williams may even have dementia. He would also go on to say that he'd be listed on the sex offender registry. Yet, later on, reflecting on the incident and defending his actions, Faulkner said in an interview,
"I met him on the street. He winked and smiled at me. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands."
Doesn't sound like someone with dementia, does it? Well, that's exactly why many people thought Faulkner did the right thing, and that Williams was using his old age as an excuse to get away with these horrible actions. This case would even spark a protest, where more than 30 people rallied outside the Maury County Courthouse in Faulkner's support, chanting, "No justice, no peace," and "Our kids' lives matter." Now, what's a father's worst nightmare? Perhaps discovering that his daughter had been repeatedly sexually abused, especially by someone he thought he could trust. August 2017 in West Palm Beach, Florida, this nightmare became a reality for one father. His daughter confided in her mother that she had been sexually assaulted multiple times by a man known in their community as Salvador, whose real name is Roberto Rubio. According to the girl's mother, the father immediately took action after hearing this disturbing news. The father, whose identity is being withheld to protect the victim, rushed home from work to confront the accused after he learned about the news from his wife. Rubio, 26 years old at the time, was previously a close friend of the family before this shocking discovery. The family had found out that Rubio had been getting into the girl's bedroom through the window and would start to assault her, even threatening her and her parents if she didn't comply. And you can just imagine how the dad felt after learning that. On the day of the confrontation, the father, armed with a box cutter, tracked Rubio to a car near Casa del Monte Mobile Home Park. And when the father found Rubio hiding, a fight broke out between them. Rubio attempted to escape, but it led the altercation to a nearby canal, and during the struggle, Rubio was stabbed, though the father insisted it wasn't intentional. Deputies arrived to find the father holding Rubio by the neck, leading him toward the officers so they could arrest him. Rubio was bleeding from a stab wound and also had a bloody nose. He was treated before being booked into the Palm Beach County Jail. There, Rubio admitted to having sexual relations with the girl but claimed it was consensual. The father had also been charged with aggravated assault and is now prohibited from contacting Rubio ever again and from possessing any weapons. Yet, despite facing legal consequences, the father had stated he has no regrets about his actions, feeling he did what was necessary to confront the man who had harmed his daughter. 2016, a father in India felt the justice system had failed his daughter, so he decided to take matters into his own hands and prevent the assailant from ever using his ever again. Harminder Singh, a 17-year-old, was caught molesting Paramjit Singh's daughter by the girl's mother. Despite the serious crime, Paramjit believed no punishment given to him by the law would be enough. April 19, 2016, after a court hearing, Paramjit publicly announced he'd forgive Parminder and settle things outside of court, but his idea of settling was far more wild than anyone could ever imagine. After the hearing, Paramjit offered Parminder a ride home on his motorbike. Parminder, sensing no danger, agreed. However, during this joyful ride, Paramjit suddenly stopped, attacked Parminder, and tied him to a tree. And then it was time for this brutal vengeance. Paramjit grabbed a machete and cut off Parminder's hands. Paramjit then fled, leaving Parminder bleeding and barely conscious by a canal. Locals found Parminder and called the police, who rushed him to the hospital. Although the doctors managed to stabilize him, his hands couldn't have been saved. The next day, Paramjit was arrested and charged with attempted murder. He admitted to planning the attack, bringing a rope and a sharp weapon with him. The incident would spark a heated debate in India. Some people understood Paramjit's frustration with the justice system, especially that this is a rather common occurrence in India, while others are stressing the importance of following the law, no matter the circumstances. This brings us to the next father on the list, who was convinced that the legal system had failed him and his daughter. Frustrated and desperate for justice, he became the enforcer of his own version of the law. The year is 2000. Eduardo Gallo made a decision that would change his life forever. He just refused to let his daughter's brutal kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder become another forgotten tragedy. When the police had failed to deliver justice, he would embark on this relentless year-long quest to find her killers himself. Paula, Eduardo's daughter, was kidnapped from the family's weekend home in Tepoztlan, near Mexico City. And like so many families of kidnapping victims in Mexico, Gallo paid the ransom. It was around $18,500 and some jewelry. But a week later, Paula's body was found. She'd been shot twice, one in the neck and one in the back. The discovery shattered Gallo. Not only had he lost his daughter, but he couldn't imagine the suffering she must have endured in her final moments. See, kidnapping in Mexico has become a horrifyingly common crime, and often the victims never return alive. The kidnapper's goal is simple: extract as much money as possible from desperate families. The fate of the victims? Well, they're often sexually assaulted and killed once the ransom's paid. At Paula's funeral, Gallo tearfully expressed his heartbreak and love, saying,
I will always love you, my adored. Thank you for your smile and your caresses. Thank you for your songs, your happiness, and your love of life. You always lit the path, so I could distinguish between justice and vengeance.
But justice never came. While some of the kidnappers were quickly arrested, the man who had pulled that trigger was still out there. So frustrated by the police's lack of action, Gallo took it upon himself to find the killer. He closed his consulting firm and transformed into a detective, tirelessly chasing leads and poring over phone records. His investigation would reveal an even darker truth. An estimated 90% of kidnappings in Mexico go unreported, as families are paralyzed by fear of retaliation or crushed by helplessness. Despite the odds, Gallo was determined to see his daughter's murderer brought to justice, no matter what or how long it took. And after almost a year of relentless work, his persistence finally paid off. He tracked down a key piece of evidence: the phone the killer had used after the crime. Gallo shared the information with police, who set up a stakeout, and soon after they would arrest 28-year-old Francisco Zamora Arellano, who would confess to the murder. For Gallo, this journey was never just about finding Paula's killer. It was also about exposing the deep corruption and inefficiency within the justice system that would allow crimes like this to continue. This fight wasn't only about him. It was for every family that had been silenced by fear or despair. And as Gallo put it,
The government won't change by a miracle. It'll change because we, as a society, will force it to.
These powerful words became the driving force for another father on this list, who would take his pursuit of justice to an entirely different level. July 9th, 1982. Kalinka Bomberski should have been enjoying her carefree summer vacation with her mother and stepfather in Lindau, Germany. But that specific night ended in horror. Kalinka was injected with a dangerous substance, was then sexually assaulted, and then killed in cold blood. The perpetrator of this heinous crime was none other than her stepfather, Dieter Krombach, a respected doctor at that time. The autopsy conducted just 2 days after Kalinka's murder couldn't officially pinpoint a cause of death. What they did find, however, was chilling. Aspirated stomach contents in her airway, undigested food in her stomach, injection marks, fresh blood stains, and a whitish substance in her internal genitalia. Shockingly, the substance was never tested, and her genital organs were also removed during the autopsy and disappeared without a trace. Maybe somebody was trying to hide something, and this gross mishandling of evidence would of course benefit Krombach the most. Now interestingly, Krombach himself was present during that autopsy, questioned just once by police. Krombach admitted to injecting Kalinka with a tanning compound to give her a summer glow, and also said he'd given her a sleeping pill that night. Later it came out that he had injected her with something far more than just a tanning agent. A dangerous combination of dopamine and isoptin was also found in her system, two things that should never have been used together. Now, Kalinka's biological father, Andrei Bomberski, was living in France at the time of her death. When he heard the news, he was devastated and immediately skeptical that his daughter had died of natural causes. He asked for the autopsy report, but it took 3 months to arrive. By then, the local prosecutor in Germany had already closed the case, ruling there had been no foul play. Bomberski wasn't about to accept that. He was convinced that his daughter had been sexually assaulted and murdered, and that the authorities were protecting a predator. Pushing for further investigation, he ran into countless roadblocks, as additional probes in Germany went nowhere. Undeterred, Bomberski started distributing flyers in Lindau, accusing Krombach of assaulting and murdering his daughter. He would also hire a top lawyer to push for a trial. But even after years and years of effort, the higher regional court in Munich dismissed the case, citing inefficient evidence to prove Krombach's injection caused Kalinka's death, either negligently or intentionally. Despite everything, Bomberski never stopped fighting for justice for his daughter, and eventually Bomberski realized that his father's instincts had been sadly correct all along. 1988, French forensic experts confirmed that the cobalt iron injection had in fact caused Kalinka's death. Krombach was convicted in France, but Germany refused to extradite him, and the French Ministry of Justice declined to issue an international warrant for his arrest. But then, disturbing details about Krombach's past had also come to light. His first wife had died under suspicious circumstances, and he'd also been convicted of drugging and sexually assaulting a female patient. Only receiving a suspended sentence and a brief medical ban, he never saw a day behind bars. For Bomberski, this was the last straw. He was determined to make Krombach pay, no matter what it took. October 18, 2009. After 27 years of frustration, Bomberski finally decided to abandon the law and take matters into his own hands. He would orchestrate the kidnapping of Krombach from Germany and transport him to France. And just like that, Krombach was found tied up and abandoned near a police station, where French authorities arrested him. 2011, he was finally convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison.
I feel good. No, there hasn't been a face-to-face yet. I'm happy that the legal arguments are underway.
For Andrei Bomberski, it was a long-awaited moment of justice, though it came with personal consequences. He was found on trial in 2014 for playing in Krombach's kidnapping, receiving a 1-year suspended jail sentence. But I bet if you ask him, he'll say that the price was worth it. This guy's legendary, showing you how far a father will go to seek justice for his child. June 9, 2012 started as a peaceful day on a ranch near Shiner, Texas, but soon it would take a dark turn. While the adults were busy shoeing a horse, a girl and her brother went to feed the chickens. Unbeknownst to them, a horrible danger was waiting for them. Jesus Mora Flores, a 47-year-old farmhand, seized the opportunity to commit a heinous act. He forcefully took the girl to a secluded shack with a sickening intent in mind. Her brother, sensing something was wrong, ran to alert their father, a 23-year-old man whose name remains undisclosed. And driven by the daughter's cries, the father raced towards the shack. What he saw was his worst nightmare. Flores and his daughter, both with their underwear removed. In a blind rage, the father pulls Flores off his daughter and begins beating him viciously, striking him in his head and neck until he's unconscious. In a state of panic, the father calls 911, his voice trembling with desperation. He admits to beating up this man who had sexually assaulted his daughter until he was knocked out, and urged the dispatcher to hurry as this man's life hung in the balance.
I need an ambulance. Okay. I need an ambulance. This guy was wrecking my daughter and I beat him up and I don't know what to do. I need a Okay.
By the time the authorities arrived, Flores had succumbed to his injuries. The father was arrested, but the community's support was overwhelming. During the trial, his attorney argued that he had no intention of killing Flores. His actions were purely driven by the instinct to protect his daughter. Witnesses corroborated the father's story, having seen Flores carrying the girl to a secluded area. The Lavaca County grand jury reviewed the evidence and concluded that the father's actions were justified. They chose not to indict him, recognizing his right to use deadly force to protect his daughter. Despite this tragedy, the small Texan community stood by the father, understanding the lengths a parent would go to protect their family. His actions, though extreme, were seen as a testament to the depth of his love and the instinct to shield his child from harm. But this wouldn't be the only time things got deadly when a dad confronted his daughter's abuser in Texas. January 5, 2024, in West Houston, Texas. A quiet apartment complex in Bateswood Drive would become the scene of a violent confrontation. At around 8:30 p.m., a father's rage turns deadly after his daughter accused her stepfather of sexual abuse. This kicks off with the young girl leaving a note for her mother, detailing the horrific abuse she'd endured at the hands of her stepfather. The mother, shaken by the discovery, calls the girl's biological father, who quickly makes his way to her apartment to discuss the situation. And as they're talking, the stepfather returns home and denies all allegations. But the father doesn't believe him, and tension between them quickly escalates. The mother and daughter step outside, leaving the two alone in the apartment. In a fit of rage and desperation, the father shot the stepfather 3 times, 1 in the stomach and 2 in the legs. The stepfather's rushed to a nearby hospital in critical condition, fighting for his life. Meanwhile, the father stays at the scene, fully cooperating with the police. He was expected to be charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and as investigators worked to determine the validity of the girl's accusations, the community was just left in shock. And despite the gravity of the situation, the father's actions were seen by many as a desperate attempt to protect his daughter. However, the case remains under investigation, and who knows what the final outcome will reveal. June 8th, 2014. Jay Maynor, a man from Alabama, fatally shot the man who had abused his daughter 12 years earlier. Now you might be wondering why it took Maynor so long to get that vengeance. Well, we have to go back to when his life turned upside down. 2002. Raymond Earl Brooks, the adopted grandfather of Jay Maynor's daughter, Julia, pleaded guilty to sexually assaulting her. Despite that, he only served 18 months behind bars. Brooks, who had raised Julia's mother as his own until she turned 21, was supposed to be a figure of trust and love, but instead he shattered their lives with his sickening actions. And after this dreadful, unforgivable act, he just got a slap on the wrist. Now, despite his anger, Jay Maynor tried to move on for the sake of Julia, who pretended in front of everyone that she was doing okay. She tried moving on with her life, get married, and have 3 kids. But deep within, Julia was grappling with PTSD, a condition that had taken a toll on her marriage. She was infuriated by the fact that this man who had stolen her innocence and shattered her life had only received such a minor punishment. So on that fateful day in 2014, Julia said something to her dad that fueled his anger. For so many years, he'd witnessed the devastating impact of Brooks' abuse on his daughter, and just could no longer bear the weight of justice failing him. In a moment of pure fury, he grabbed his firearm and headed onto the street with one sole purpose: to kill Brooks. As Jay made his way towards Brooks' residence, he spotted a man who had been romantically involved with his stepdaughter and fired shots towards the Berlin Plaza Quick Stop. For context here, his stepdaughter, who remains unknown, had ended that relationship shortly before this incident. And although the stepdaughter's ex-boyfriend got out of this unharmed, Jay would still face charges of attempted murder here. Julia would later say that he targeted this man due to his abusive behavior toward her stepsister. But after shooting at this boyfriend, Jay Maynor proceeded to where Brooks lived and gunned him down right there at his doorstep. Now, what did Julia say to her father that pissed him off so much that he was willing to eliminate the 2 men he believed had harmed his daughters without a second thought? So Jay Maynor was arrested without incident by police and openly admitted to his crimes. He agreed to a plea deal that would see him spend 40 years behind bars, 20 for Brooks's murder and another 20 for that attempted murder. Following the sentencing, the district attorney said,
Regardless of the emotions from what may have occurred 12 years ago, we can't prosecute on emotions. We prosecute and try and uphold the criminal laws of the state of Alabama to the best of our ability, and that's what we did in this case.
On the other hand, Julia Maynor believed the prison sentence was unjust for a man who was simply trying to protect his daughters. In one interview, she said,
He took the plea deal so that I didn't have to relive the station and also be on the stand in front of a bunch of people. My father was protecting me, like a father should do.
For the first time in my life, I do not feel scared. For the first time in my life, I do not wake up feeling fear.
Whether Jay Maynor's act was justified or not, we'll leave that for you to decide. March 16th, 1984, something crazy went down at this airport terminal. Gary Plauché, hidden with a baseball cap and sunglasses, nervously checked his gun in his pocket. His heart was racing as he awaited the arrival of a man who had just inflicted unspeakable horror on his son. When the police finally brought the suspect into view, Gary seized his moment. In a dramatic and shocking act, he pulled out his gun and shot Jeff Doucet in the head, with the whole thing caught on camera. Now, before this fateful day, Gary Plauché lived a relatively ordinary life. He was an equipment salesman who also worked as a cameraman for a local news station. His whole life revolved around his small but close-knit family. But everything in Gary's life was soon to come tumbling down. February 19th, 1984, Gary's son, Jody, had just ended his usual karate class when his instructor, Jeff Doucet, offered him a ride. Jody called his mom, June, to ask for permission, and without hesitation she agreed because, after all, Doucet was a respected figure in the community and had been teaching karate to local kids for years. However, this little favor would soon turn into a nightmare. Instead of taking Jody home, Doucet drove him to a bus station, and then they traveled together to the West Coast. First, Doucet would change their appearances to evade detection by shaving his beard and dyeing Jody's blonde hair black. Then they ended up in a rundown motel near Disneyland in Anaheim, California. It was here that Ducey would assault Jody, the very boy he was supposed to protect. Despite the fear and trauma, Jody got the courage to ask Ducey if he could call his parents. Who knows what he was thinking, but Ducey allowed that call, which led to a quick response from Jody's family. The police would trace that call and apprehend Ducey. They put Jody back on a flight to Louisiana, and he was finally safe from his abductor. However, Gary Plauché had anger brewing up inside him. He spent the following days drinking his frustration at a local bar, desperately trying to find out when Ducey was going to come back home to Louisiana for trial. By a stroke of luck, a former colleague from WBRZ News would tell him that Ducey would be arriving at the Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport at 9:08 a.m. the next day. With his determination to confront Ducey fueling him, Gary spent hours devising a plan. The next day arrives and he's disguised in a baseball cap and sunglasses, blending into the crowd at the airport, keeping his identity hidden. He watches on as WBRZ News sets up their cameras to record the moment Ducey would be brought off the plane by a police escort. And as Ducey is being led through the airport, he passes the news crew, unaware of Gary's eyes watching his every step. And then everything happens so fast, Gary shoots him right in the head. Bam! This was all captured on WBRZ cameras, and the footage, now with over 20 million views on YouTube, shows Ducey dropping while a police officer tackles Gary to the ground. And during the chaos, the officer, a friend of Gary's, just demanded an explanation, asking him, "Why, Gary? Why?" Through his tears, Gary responded,
If someone did this to your kid, you do the same.
Gary Plauché's act of vengeance led to a 7-year suspended sentence, 5 years of probation, and 300 hours of community service. Remarkably, though, he served no prison time. And to this day, his story continues to stir debate about justice and vigilantism. So, fans of Dynasty, we leave it up to you. What are your thoughts about what he did?